Okay, we're going to invite up Mrs. Gullary. Before I do, I just want to mention, I have never shared the speaker listener technique with a couple and not had it dramatically change their communication. Even though it's very clunky and clumsy and, but it's always been effective when we've used it. Let's welcome Mrs. Gullary, who taught us that.
Okay, before we begin, I'd just like to show you a clip from a movie which came out way before the ballroom dancing phase came out in our movement. And the movie itself is not that great, but this clip is just a little, like maybe 2 minutes about the value of marriage. And I always thought it was lovely, so I thought it'd be a nice way to start. Okay, so can you see the screen? Okay.
You are on a strange journey to redemption, Mr. Devon.
And a very long one, Mrs. Clark.
All these promises that we make and we break, why is it, do you think, that people get married?
Passion.
No.
It's interesting, because I would have taken you for a romantic. Why that?
Because we need a witness to our lives. There's a billion people on the planet. I mean, what does any one life really mean? But in a marriage, you're promising to care about everything. The good things, the bad things, the terrible things, the mundane things. All of it, all the time, every day. You're saying your life will not go unnoticed because I will notice it. Your life will not go unwitnessed because I will be your witness. You can quote me on that if you like.
Sure I will.
Anyway, the reason that I brought you here today.
Okay, he was so involved that he was like.
You say cut, he's like this.
Isn't that a beautiful description of why people get married? I thought that was lovely. Because we need a witness. This movie is Shall We Dance? And it's actually a good movie because it's about a sort of a, dare I say, middle-aged couple. And the husband has a secret passion. He wants to learn ballroom dancing. But he doesn't want to tell his wife because he thinks that she'll think he's nuts. So he hides it from her, and she thinks he's having an affair. So then she hires this dude here he's a private investigator, to find out, who he's sleeping with, and then finds out that he's just dancing. And so it's a nice movie about, an older couple reinventing their marriage, and it's cute. It's not like heavenly deep or anything like that, but it's a good movie. This is my favorite part, though. Yes?
The original movie is a Japanese movie.
I know. Yeah. Is it, are we switched? Okay. Now, before I go into this next part, I wanted to just mention where is my couple? They're not back yet. Okay, they did this on purpose because they didn't want me to invite them back up. I got so excited about how they did the speaker-listener technique that I forgot to do the second part, but I wanted you to know that there's a second part to it that's really, really important. So after the person who's the speaker really feels like the listener got what she had to say, which you could see he actually got it and she felt that, then you're supposed to switch. So at that point, he should have become the speaker, and it would have been his turn to share whatever he wanted to share, whether or not it was about that specific topic or not. So I just wanted you to know it's not a one-sided thing, okay? It's meant to go back and forth like that, all right? By the way, did people actually practice a little bit? Yeah? It was good? Anybody want to share their experience? I know you guys just don't like to talk. It's not a talking group here. What's with Seattle?
We're shocked by the sunshine.
Yeah, I know, you're all, I know, you can't think straight. All the sun is too much for you. I know. One couple want to share their experience? Anybody have nothing?
I'll share something.
Okay.
Because no one else will. Well, my wife and I have, exemplary communication. We never struggle or fight, so we had to make something up. That's a lie. Well, we talked about, well, we have a real issue we're dealing with right now because we're actually looking to buy a house. And together with my elder daughter and her family and our family. And so there's many concerns about that, and a lot of them that you didn't find out until you kind of really get to the very end of the process. And so we found out, like, my wife's concern, right, more, it all gelled at the end of it. So we talked about that, what do you feel about that? So we thought we use something that we really need clarity about, and then I shared about how I did, and it was good, yeah.
So you found that you were both able to share honestly?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, I hope that you will be able to use it sometime in the future and that it's helpful. It's just a strategy, but it can really be useful when you have difficult things to talk about and you really want to talk about them. So now I want to shift over a little bit. I talked earlier about how I firmly believe that marriage is really our spiritual path. Father's been saying this in his own way for years, but I don't think we really got it because we weren't using the speaker-listener technique. Because we couldn't put it somewhere. We just couldn't catch what Father was really trying to communicate. But I think we're starting to get it now, that really it's in the marriage and in our family that is how we grow our characters and our capacity for love. So I think if we can look at our marriages that way, it's a little bit more motivating when things get difficult. Don't you think? Yeah. So I want to just talk about, I want to look at marriage kind of from that perspective, how we can grow through our marriages and positively, how it can be helpful. Can you fix that so that all that... It's on my computer. Is there like a computer person over here? Neil. I don't know, get rid of the stuff on the side there. Like, there should be nothing. I don't know why.
Reverend Krishna's your IT guy, you're in trouble.
Really? Oh, Neil! Younger person. Oh, God. Okay, well, that's okay. You don't mind all this other stuff. There we go. Okay. Oops, that's too little. Here we go. Okay, we won't worry about this stuff on the side. I see nothing? When it has to do with computers, you know it's better than a person. You should know this by now. All right, so has anyone ever felt like this? I'm the only one doing the work in this relationship? Yes? Oh, he's just being good. Okay, let me ask you, has anyone ever felt like they were doing all the work in the relationship? Yes. Anybody else besides that one brave girl? Yes? Yes. It's very common that in a couple, one person is doing more of the relationship work than the other. It's kind of normal. And you ever felt like this, like my spouse was always? I know, it's very symbolic. I had to use it. I can only use it in, certain age group. I figured you can appreciate it. You ever feel like that? Like I'm doing all the growing, but my spouse isn't growing at all? Anybody ever felt like that? Okay, you can close your eyes and then everybody will be more honest. Right, okay. So I think we've all had that experience. And how do we respond when we feel like that? Oh, I'm not using mic. Sorry. How do we respond? Like when we feel like we're doing all the work, how does that make us feel usually? Huh? What was that? Resentful, yeah. Yeah, how come I'm doing all the work? This is like takes two to make this thing work. How come I'm doing all the work, right? However, like I said, it's actually quite common in relationship where one person tends to be doing more of that than the other. And we all know what I'm going to say next. It tends to be the women that are the emotional thermometers of relationship. And I'm saying that because it's actually true. Because the way women are made, relationship is a priority for us. So all our value comes from the quality of our relationships, whereas for men, their value comes from other things. I don't know what they are, but no. So it tends to be that's really the way we're made. So we put more energy there because our value comes from that. And we tend to be the ones that are like noticing, like we haven't talked for a while, we haven't had a date for a while. You know, we notice those things. And frankly, it's a good thing that there's one person in the couple that notices that, don't you think? I mean, really, if you were married, if both of you were like not paying attention, then that could be very serious, right? Both of you weren't paying attention and the whole thing could just go down the tubes. So it's good. So what I'd like you to do is look at your spouse. If you're the person that has the spouse that does most of the work or is the emotional regulator, I want you to turn to them. If you're the person that has the spouse, I want you to turn to them and thank them for noticing how your relationship is doing, okay? Do that if you're with them right now. Because if it wasn't for them, you'd be in trouble. Okay. So when you're that person that's doing all the work, it's very easy to want to blame the other person. Like, you're just a wreck, you're not investing, it's just not fair. But we know that blaming is not very smart. Blaming in any capacity is always sort of like poison in a relationship, right? Any kind of blame or criticism is going to just, it's just like poison. So it's not a good place to be. So we have to think of another way. That's why I want you to look at each other and appreciate the other person for helping you to grow. Okay, I already said that. Let's skip it. So, like we were talking about earlier, I want you to think about becoming agents of change in your own relationship. And remember that it's just small steps that need to be taken here, not huge ones, okay? Because we know that any beginning starts with small steps. So I'm going to suggest some small steps that you guys can take today, and you could try one of them, see if anything happens, okay? The thing is, we get upset if we're the only person taking responsibility because we often don't feel like we're making progress. Does that make sense? The person that's the one who feels like they're doing most of the work, they get resentful not just because they're doing most of the work, but because they're not being successful. I'm not getting anywhere with making the relationship any better. And so people get frustrated, right? So we both want the same thing. We want to make progress. We want to keep growing. But we often get stuck because we don't know what to do. Isn't that true? Yeah. So what do we do? What do we do? I don't know. Let's read more Hundake. See if that works. Okay, we can just keep reading more Hundake. That's always helpful, but there's other things that we could try as well. Okay, so even when we really, really, really try to get our loved ones to change, our spouses to change, we're often unsuccessful. First of all, because we can actually never get anybody to change, can we? Has anybody here ever tried to get somebody to change? Has anybody ever been successful in getting someone to change? Not really. The only thing that we can do is change ourselves, right? So that's why I want you to think about looking at your marriage from a different perspective. Instead of thinking about how I can get my spouse to change, impossible, I want you to look at it a little bit differently. One, I want you to think about it as your spiritual path, thinking that we are all responsible for our own spiritual lives, for the welfare and the health of ourselves and our spouses, and the quality of our marriage. Nobody else. Okay? That's the first thing. And the second thing is I want you to think about your relationship like it's a dance. Okay? Because if your relationship is a dance, you can change the steps. And if you change the steps, if you do one thing differently, if I change the steps, then the person that I'm dancing with has to change too. It's just the way it is. So that's what I want you to be thinking. What can I do? What can I do? Instead of thinking, what can they do? Or what should they do differently so that I'll be happier? I want you to be thinking about, what could I do? What one step can I do differently that will change the dynamic? Okay? Okay, so I'm going to talk about some strategies for change that you may not have ever thought about before. Okay, the first one is this. If it's not working, try something else. Now, I know that sounds interesting, but think about it. Most of us have tried, you ever said to yourself, I've just tried everything I can possibly think of, and nothing ever changes or nothing ever works? Anybody ever said that? Yeah. But you know what? We haven't tried everything. We've just tried the same thing over and over. Because actually, when it comes to our relationships, we're very uncreative. It's interesting. We just do the same thing over and over. You know, so I want you to think about for a second, what do you do in a situation where something that your spouse does that bugs you, okay? Just take a second and think about something that your spouse does that bugs you. I know that's hard. Everybody got something in your mind? Now think about what do you usually do when your spouse does that? Everybody got that in your mind? And does it work? No? Yes? No. No. Okay, but have you thought of anything different, or do you just keep doing the same thing? Just keep doing the same thing. See, we're all like that. It's very interesting. We just do the same thing over and over, and sometimes we maybe do it louder. But it's the same thing, you know? Like this, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting to get a different result. That's what we do in our marriages. We just say the same things, act the same way, just do it a little bit louder. And we still think that if we do the same thing over and over, at some point, our spouse will do it differently. They'll change. It's kind of illogical when you think about it, right? So I want you to think about it from another perspective. What can I do differently? Because if you do one thing differently, you will affect your spouse, because we're connected, are we not? Every single thing that your spouse does affects you, right? Either positively or negatively. Especially like when you're married, you are like so tuned into each other. You know, you can walk into a room when your spouse is sitting down and you know exactly how they feel without saying a word, right? Right? You don't have to say, how are you? You can tell. You look at him, you see his face, his body language, you know exactly. When you're married with somebody, you can tell exactly. So every little thing that your spouse does or doesn't do affects you. The point is, most of the time we're doing things and saying things without thinking about them, without thought. So, but if we think about it, we can choose to make certain changes, or we can choose to do certain steps that will affect the relationship. Because you cannot stay in the same dynamic if one person does one thing differently. If you do one thing differently, the other person has to react differently. Do you know what I'm saying? Kind of? Yeah. So again, it comes back to me. It actually really doesn't have that much to do with your spouse. It has to do with me. So we always can influence our spouse, not by trying to get them to change, but by doing something differently. So if we keep doing the same thing over and over, we need to think about what we can do a little bit differently and see if that makes a difference. The key here is that the dynamic of your relationship is what's a problem, not your spouse. And that's really important, because when we're upset with our spouse, we're upset with something, we blame our spouse. If you did that differently, or if you didn't do that, I would be happier. But really, it's not our spouse, it's the way that we are relating. It's the actual relationship. So we just have to make one little change, and then our spouse has to change, because, you know what I'm saying? Are you following me? Okay. Okay. So I want you to think about that. Focus on changing the interaction, not your spouse, because that's the only place that you can make a difference. The second strategy that's interesting is sometimes it's helpful to do something unexpected. You know, not only do we want to do something different, but sometimes it's really helpful, because we are such creatures of habit, especially in our marriage relationships, to do something really out of the box. And again, this applies with our kids as well. There's an example of this in I forget the book that I read, but how many people here still have teenagers at home? Yeah, okay. So you ever had that experience where you call your kid and say, maybe one of your kids has to set the table, that's their chore. I don't know, kids don't even have chores anymore, but if you have kids with chores, right? So like, honey, can you come and set the table? Dinner's almost ready. And what do they usually say? What? Later. They usually say yes, later, or in a minute. That's the favorite line. In a minute. And then, 20 minutes later, you're like, honey, could you come set the table? Dinner's almost ready. And they usually say, in a minute. Right, and this goes on and on. This is a perfect example of doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different response. Why would your kid change their mind and do something different? Like, why do we think that one day miraculously they're just going to jump up from their video game and come and sit at the table the first time you ask? Illogical, right? So sometimes it's helpful, instead of us expecting a change in them, for us to do something different. So let's think, what could we do that's different in that kind of situation? Any ideas? Yeah? There's an idea. Yeah, sometimes you have to think sort of out of the box. So that's something like what this mom did. She called her daughter, and she said, just a minute, a couple of times, and then finally her daughter came to the table, and instead of mom setting the table, which she always did because her daughter never did, her daughter sat down at the table, and they were having pasta, and mom went over to the table with the pasta pot and just put it right on the table in front of her daughter. And her daughter got it very quickly. You don't set the table, you eat off the table. Okay. After that, she always set the table. So, sometimes it's helpful to just sort of think out of the box, something a little bit different. And we can do that with our spouses as well. Experiment with new attitudes and behaviors. Try something new, try something different. Shock them a little bit. Sometimes that's really helpful. And it makes a change. It disrupts the regular pattern, because we get so boring, the same old in the way that we relate. So, sometimes it's good to just take a risk and do something crazy, all right? Sometimes you can actually help your spouse help you by asking them for something specific. What? Okay, wait. Did you catch that? Most of the time, again, it's like the same kind of thing that we talked about earlier about mind reading. We're kind of always hoping that they'll figure out what we want, but sometimes we could just ask them, honey, it would be really nice if you could just put the dishes away tonight. Really? Okay. Sometimes if you just ask them, sometimes people just want to know what to do. Especially, how the guys were saying, like, they never know what their wives are thinking? It's true. Sometimes, and they don't know what to do. Sometimes it's good for us to just tell them, honey, if you did this, it would make me so happy. Really? Yeah, you could try that. Just try it. I'm just suggesting it as a strategy. If you've never tried it before, just try it, see what happens. But the idea here is that I want you to think differently. I want you to think that your actions and your reactions are contributing to this pattern. And if you change your action or reaction, the whole dynamic can change, okay? You have so much responsibility and so much potential to make changes. And also, instead of trying to change our spouse, we can change ourselves. I know that we don't like that one, but it actually really works, okay? Here's an example. I did this in my own house. I was thinking, how most of the time we get upset with our spouses over very little things? Anybody know what I'm saying? Okay, my husband is a neatnik. Okay, he's very sort of right-angled, very neat, like that. Anybody married to a neatnik? You know what I mean? No neatniks here? So he's always like right angles. However, every night after dinner, he has a banana, okay? And every night after dinner, he leaves the banana peel on the counter. I kid you not, every single night. And the garbage can is right here. The counter is here, the garbage can is here. And he puts everything away except for this banana peel. So, over the years, this banana peel has gotten bigger in my mind until it is like driving me crazy. Do you know what I'm saying? It's a banana peel, but I just don't get it. And he just does it and does it and does it. And so I thought, I'm going to try something different. Instead of saying, honey, why don't you throw away the banana peel? I thought, I'm going to try changing myself instead of getting upset with him as an experiment. So I did. I thought, I'm going to reframe this whole thing. And instead of getting upset every time I see the banana peel, I'm going to think, isn't that the cutest thing? I did this, I'm serious. That is so cute, how my husband leaves his banana peel on the counter every night. How totally cute is that? So that was my plan. So the next night I went into the kitchen and there it was. cutiform, the banana peel. And so he's in the living room, I'm in the kitchen, and I called out, honey, you left the banana peel on the counter. I love it when you do that. I have no idea what he did because I was in the other room, but I'm assuming he was like, and I did that every night for about a week. Every night I would go in there and I just, it's so cute, it's still here, I love it, like that. By the end of the week, I don't know what he thought, but by the end of the week, it was actually very cute for me. It became this cute thing that only my husband does. Do you know what I'm saying? So it works, actually. You can reframe things. You can change the way you think. He still does it, by the way, just so you know. Unbelievable. Well, you know, one time I gave this talk at the Learning Center, something like this, but I was using this example at the Learning Center and for younger people. And my husband was there. And while I was talking, he ran out and bought a banana. I kid you not. And at the end of the talk, he comes in with the banana. He just walks up and he goes, here. Well, it was funny. It can't be repeated, but it was pretty cute if you know my husband, you know. Okay, anyway. So sometimes it helps if we can just think, what can I do differently rather than what can I expect from my spouse? You know, how can I change the way I think? Anybody hear about the butterfly effect? Is that something that anyone is familiar with? Very interesting thing in terms of relationship. The butterfly effect is very simple. It says that sometimes when there's a big hurt or a big rift between people, a very small conciliatory gesture can repair it. It's like not a logical thing. You know, like I'm really, really, really angry with you. So you would think that you'd have to do some really, really big thing to repair it. But interestingly enough, it's often a very small conciliatory gesture that can repair things. So this is important information for you. So for example, say you have a huge fight about whatever it is that you have huge fights about. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to make this up? What are we going to do? How are we going to talk about it? I don't want to go to bed angry. Oh my God, you know, you're stressing about the whole thing if you're a woman. I had to say that, I'm sorry, because the guys don't worry about these kinds of things. I'm sorry, I can't, I'm so sorry. I know, sisters, don't you lie awake at night next to your husband who's like asleep already and you're thinking, oh my God, and worrying about everything? Yes? It's not just me. No, what? They do, no, they do, I'm just kidding, they do. They just express it differently. Totally differently. They express it differently. Say you're fighting with your spouse and you're really concerned about what to do. Sometimes something very, very simple can restore the whole thing. Something simple like this. You could just be walking by him on your way to the kitchen to put away his banana peel, and you could just go like this and just keep walking. 1 2-second touch, that could change everything. Do you know what I'm saying? Just a touch like that. Because that touch can say a whole lot of stuff, can't it? I'm sorry, forgive me, can we start over? I still love you, right? One little touch that's the butterfly effect. One teeny tiny little thing can restore a huge big mistake. It's interesting and hopeful when you think about it. Sometimes, here's another strategy. Sometimes it's good to do nothing. Now I know that doesn't make sense when you first think about it. But sometimes we put so much focus on a perceived problem that we have that we blow it out of proportion. Do you know what I mean? It just gets bigger and bigger the more we focus on it until it just becomes like my banana peel. It was started out, a banana peel turned into this huge thing. Sometimes it's good to just stop focusing on it for a while. That's an actual strategy that you can do. Just pull back and put your focus somewhere else for a while. And interestingly enough, sometimes when we do that, you know, people will respond in an interesting way, because it's just like the spouse that's always trying to follow the person so they can have the conversation, and the other one who's withdrawing. If you persist, they will resist. The more you push for a conversation, the more they'll pull away. The more you push to try to solve something, the bigger it gets, the harder it gets to restore and to fix. So sometimes it's better to just put it aside for a little while. Leave it there. Focus on something else. Sometimes things just can fix themselves. Sometimes we feel like we have to fix everything, and then we make it difficult for other people to jump in with their own kind of ideas and suggestions. Because sometimes we just want to be fixers, right? You know anybody who likes to be a fixer? Yeah, sometimes we just want to fix things, but then if we're always fixing things, it's hard. We're not allowing for things to grow and heal in a more natural way. We're not giving our spouses the opportunity to change and grow, you know, because we're like trying to control everything. So sometimes if we can do that, if we can just stop and do nothing about this particular problem, sometimes you can find your own spouse has the potential to do stuff that you never expected. But sometimes we prevent our spouse from growing because we're always trying to fix it. We're always trying to control it. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's good to just do nothing for a little while, see what happens. Because very often the more one person does, the less the other person has to do. So you know when you first get married, you don't sit around and discuss like who will do the dishes and who will take out the garbage and you don't do that when you first get married. It sort of just happens organically, right? It just sort of, the jobs get divided up. And say there's like something that you hate to do. So the more you hate to do it, the more your spouse will, you do it less, so your spouse will compensate by doing it more. Do you know what I mean? That's how it is. It's a dance. So you affect each other. So if you are trying to change some behavior, you're thinking about, well, if I keep not doing it, they're going to keep doing it. So maybe I should do it a little bit and they'll do it less. Do you understand? You have to think about your role in the dance and see if you can make a change. Things can change completely. Here's another good strategy, which is really hard to do. Try stopping criticism for like a day or a week. We were talking earlier about as soon as you make a condition, then it hits, right? So if you make a condition like this, I swear to you, the next day you're going to notice all these things that are coming out of your mouth that you had no idea how many critical words come out of your mouth. Again, because we're not paying attention. We're not aware of how we speak to each other, you know? So this is, if you stop criticizing, that will change the whole dynamic, don't you think? Instead of thinking, oh, they shouldn't be doing this, I wish they wouldn't speak to me like that, think about the way you're speaking. It's an interesting strategy, don't you think? This is spiritual life, is it not? Yes, this is why marriage is our spiritual path, because it's right here in this relationship that we create the space for God to come, or we block God's presence by the way we're talking, by the way we're relating. It's right here. It's not over there. Do you know what I mean? So you're looking at yourself as a spiritual person, thinking about how I can become a better person, and then your changes will affect your relationship. Okay? You can also stop fighting your husband's traits. I wish my husband wasn't like this. I wish my wife didn't do that. I wish they were more like me, like Betsy said. We spend a lot of our energy wishing our spouses were different, instead of thinking about how I could become a better person. It's a waste of energy, all this thinking about how I wish my spouse was better, nicer, prettier, skinnier, whatever, It's a waste of energy. Instead, we could be putting all that energy into thinking, what kind of person am I? How am I doing as a mom, as a wife, How many good things came out of my mouth today to my kids, to my spouse? If we could switch and put our energy there, it could make such a difference in the dynamic, in the dance. Thinking about how one change that you make affects the whole relationship. Are you still with me? Are you following? And another thing that you could do differently, have you ever had a friend who had some visible thing that was unusual? Like, say, a beautiful beauty mark on their face or something like that. When you first meet somebody and they have a visual thing that's confusing, when it's distracting, and then when you become friends with them, you don't even notice it anymore. You ever had that experience? Of course, we've all had that experience. We notice certain things when we're first meeting people, and then when we love them, we don't even see them anymore because it doesn't bother us. So if we could do that with people's internal characteristics, not just their external characteristics, it would be helpful, don't you think? In other words, we put so much focus on the negative rather than on the positive. So if we could switch and just think about the things that we don't necessarily like. Like when you love somebody, but they have, well, I don't know, what do you think here? Maybe you love somebody who's got eyes of two different colors. That's some people do have that, So that becomes like, it's just like a fact of life. It doesn't bother you. It's like them. You love them, and you love the fact that they have a blue eye and a green eye. It's totally cool. Do you know what I'm saying? We're much more forgiving with the external than we are with the internal. And we're much more forgiving with everybody else other than our spouse. So when we're very forgiving with our friends when we get to know them and we know all their foibles and their strange little, quirks and everything, we don't care. But if it's our spouse, drives us nuts. And we're very judgmental. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's helpful if we can think about, this is just a fact of life. They are this way, and that's that. Instead of all the energy that we put into trying to get them to change. Just like when somebody has a scar, and it's just a fact of life. It is what it is. We don't have to change it. We just have to focus on our own spiritual life. So your spouse might be weird, but it is what it is. So figure out how to love them, because that's spiritual life right there, And as I said earlier, in every marriage there are lots of unresolved differences. So it doesn't make sense to focus on those. It makes more sense to focus on the things that you have in common and the things that you love about each other, right? Life is short. And here's another strategy that people can try. Sometimes it's good to just act as if you like the weird things. This is very much, Divine Principle 101, isn't it? You do the hard thing first, and then your heart kicks in after that, right? So first you act like you love somebody, and then eventually your heart kicks in. So then there's something that drives you crazy, like the banana peel or the fact that your husband never puts the toilet seat down or whatever it is. Act as if it doesn't bother you. And sometimes when you start with the external, your internal catches up. These are all just interesting strategies rather than doing the same thing over and over. Are you following me? I'm just giving you some ideas things you could try that are different than doing all the things that you've been doing over and over that haven't got you anywhere. Again, change your behavior first, change your actions first, and often, your heart will kick into gear. Okay, I'm going to try to go a little faster here. Okay, key point is we all have to realize that there's just no way that we can ever control our partner or get them to change. We know this, but we still keep trying. I just want to keep saying it over and over. Let's focus on helping ourselves change, getting ourselves to change so that we can change the dynamic, okay? So all of these things that I've just been talking about, I'm hoping that you're thinking about how you can try some of them in your own blessing relationship. Now, why else do you think we keep doing the same thing over and over, besides the fact that we're uncreative? Can't think of anything else. What do you think? Yeah.
Well, the problems don't change, so we're doing the same things for the same problems.
Okay, that's a good point. Sometimes the problems are the same, so we just automatically act the same way towards the problems. That's good. Anything else? Why else do you think? I think that's good, yeah. Why else do we do the same thing all the time instead of trying something new? Yeah? Yes. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to give you one more suggestion about why, another reason why we tend to do the same thing over and over. One of the reasons is because our diagnosis of the situation gets in the way. And what I mean by that is, sometimes we assume this is the problem, and then that's what we've decided, and so we act a certain way because that's our diagnosis. Do you know what I'm saying? Well, we don't know exactly the reasons why people do things. So sometimes we can look at the problem in a different way, and that will change the way we respond to it. So for example, say you're married for a couple years, and all of a sudden your spouse stops being interested in having intimate relationships. That's a big deal in a marriage, right? So you're thinking, what's going on, right? You're thinking, you're trying to figure it out. You're trying to diagnose the situation. Why is this happening? So you're thinking, okay, well maybe, we had a fight a couple of weeks ago. Maybe he's still mad at me. And he's trying to get back at me. And so, well, fine then, I don't care. Fine, I'll show him. Okay, so if that's your diagnosis, that he's doing it on purpose because you had a fight, then you're gonna come up with a solution that makes sense given the diagnosis. Maybe you come up with a different diagnosis. So if that's what you do, then you might do something mean towards him. Well, fine, I'll show you, and then you start to get into this dynamic based on your diagnosis of the situation. Maybe you'd think, well, I wonder if it has something to do with the way things have been going at work. He's been complaining a lot about his boss. He seems really unhappy. Maybe he's depressed. Gee, maybe he's really depressed. Maybe he should go to the doctor. Maybe I'll call up the doctor and make an appointment for him. Okay, so different diagnosis, different response, right? Same situation, my husband doesn't want to have sex, but my diagnosis is different, so my response is different. You understand? So sometimes we get stuck in our marriages with certain situations because we get stuck with a certain diagnosis, we can't get out of it, right? So sometimes it really helps to change the diagnosis. Change it, and then we can change the way we respond to it. And also, when we do that, sometimes we really prevent our spouse from growing. We just assume, that they're like this. They're like this, and so I have to be like this. Do you know what I'm saying? My husband is not very spiritual. So I have to be like this because he's like that. You know what I'm saying? How many marriages? And then you just kind of keep going. He's not spiritual, so I have to do the condition. And then he's not making the offering, so I have to go to Chungpyeong. And then she's going to Chungpyeong, so I have to spend more time with the kid. You're bouncing off each other. Like, you see the dance? Do you see what I'm saying? You do something, she responds. He does something, you respond. And it's all about how you perceive the situation, your diagnosis of the situation. So it's very, very helpful if, what would I do there? So sometimes our actions will make sense based on the assessment that we have of the situation. But always our diagnosis will narrow the field of our response. And sometimes it's helpful to change the way we look at the situation so that we can change the way we respond. And that makes all the difference. So when you have a situation where you feel stuck between you and your spouse, ask yourself how you're assessing it. And see if you can make a change in the way you look at it. And see if that makes a difference in the way you respond to it. That's another strategy. Another idea of something that you can do differently. Everybody knows this one, accentuate the positive. We do this when our kids are little. Good job, honey. We're very good when our kids are little. We slack off a little bit as they get older and start freaking us out. And it's hard to do that with our spouse after 30 years. But actually, we are very responsive to people saying nice things to us. We like it when people notice we did something good and mention it. This is a totally easy goal to make that could actually change the dynamic of your relationship within a week. If you made a goal to say 3 nice things every day to your spouse, I promise you that will make a difference in the dynamic in your relationship. So we do that with our dogs. Well, we forget to do it with our spouses, okay? So we have to practice what we preach. We talk about being good people. We talk about being loving people. But the person that we're supposed to be loving the most often gets the worst part of us. We're all nice and loving all day long, and then we come home and just collapse on the couch and start talking nasty to each other because we're so tired. It's so not what we're supposed to be doing. The best of ourselves should be going to our spouse because this is where God wants to be. Right? So we've got to really switch the way that we're thinking and the way that we're acting. We have to ask ourselves, how often do I appreciate my spouse? That's the first question. And the second question is, how often do I actually tell my spouse when I appreciate them? That's the second one. And if we could make any changes there, that talk about developing Shimjung in your household and in your relationship. Just by saying words of gratitude and appreciation, you can completely change the Shimjung around you. Where you put your effort is what grows. I talked about that earlier. And one thing, if we can start to pay more attention, then we can see when we're making a difference. You know, like the last time it felt really good between you and your spouse. Think about that. Think about the last time it really felt good with each other. Were you on a date or were you just at home? What was happening when that was happening? It's not magic. It wasn't just magic or luck that you felt really connected. What were you doing when things felt good? What were you doing then that was different? If you can figure that out, you can do it over and over. Wouldn't that be smart? Instead of doing the bad stuff over and over, if we could figure out what we were doing when we felt really close, and then we could just do it again. That would be nice, wouldn't it? This is why we want to become more intentional and pay more attention, not to our spouse, but to what I'm thinking and feeling, what I'm doing. So the idea is you want to do more of what works well and a lot less of what's not working. So we want to do less of the same old that's not getting the results we want. I talked about this morning. Basically, a lot of spiritual people are onto this idea that Father and Mother have been talking about for years, that it is within relationship where most important growth comes. Because when you talk about maturity, what does that mean? We all want to become mature people, right? We're all working on that. Maturity is the capacity for love. So, of course, we can love other people as much as we want. I am such a loving person with everybody else. But when I go home, if I can't be loving to my husband, there's a disconnect there in terms of me as a spiritual person. Do you know what I'm saying? So we're not the only people that understand this, but I think we've definitely got an edge because we have our two parents and we have the principal, and so we should know better. We should know, and we should be inviting Heavenly Father into our relationships as much as we can. And we can be doing that. So that's all what this is about, is just giving you some new ideas of small strategies that you could try, things that you can do differently, because this, your marriage, the person that you're sitting next to is the person, just like Father's always said, your spouse is your second Messiah. What does that mean? They're the person, like Injanim always talks about true rubbing, right? That's how we grow. You're driving me crazy, you're helping me to grow. You're driving me nuts, thank you for helping me to grow. Because otherwise I could just pretend I could just fake it and pretend and feel like I was a great loving person. But you know better. My husband is the one that knows what I'm really like. Just like in the movie clip, you are the witness to your spouse. You know them better than anything, right? So, is your second Messiah right next to you, right? So the healthiest, smartest way to look at your blessing and your marriage is to think this is the place, this is the laboratory for our spiritual growth. And everything that happens every day between the two of you is your spiritual practice. And if you actually read Hyungjanim's book, Changpadong, I'm not saying it right, but you know which one I mean, right? The House of Heavenly. Thank you. In the introduction of that book, he talks about this. He said, us unificationists, we think that our spiritual life is over here and our marriages and families are over here, but no. He said, when you're singing your son a lullaby to get them to go to sleep, that's your spiritual life right there. When you're trying to communicate something hard and difficult with your spouse, that's your spiritual life. He says that in the book. I love this book. So you should read that introduction if you haven't already. Reread it because it's really good. So the whole point here that I'm trying to make is that it actually makes sense if we look at our marriages and our blessings as our spiritual practice. Then we can begin to shift our focus point from you need to change to my own spiritual life. You are pointing out things in me that I have to change. I am impatient, not because you're driving me nuts, but because I am an impatient person and I have to deal with that. Thank you for making me aware of how impatient I am. Okay? And all of our relationship work is our spiritual work. That's the point. It's not separate. Our spiritual work is not just when we come to church on Sunday. It's all day long in our family. Okay? So here's a very good question that you can ask yourself when you're having some kind of challenge with your spouse. Okay? Ask yourself, if I am trying to live according to my core values, to the principle, to what I know is true, what will I do right now? How will I respond in this situation? As a person that loves God and true parents and believes in the principle, then how should I respond right now? If we could take that moment to think between have that pause button between the stimulus and the response. Just take that pause button and think. Ask ourselves this question. You're driving me crazy. I feel like killing you, but that doesn't connect to the person I'm trying to be. I am actually trying to be a loving person, and you're the most important person to me in my life. Therefore, I am going to try to respond differently. See if that makes a difference. And then, instead of putting our focus on all the things that we can't change, how about if we put our focus on building community, on building shimjang, on building a good, comfortable environment in our home where nobody feels judged and everyone feels appreciated? How about that? That's our spiritual life, isn't it? Of course. That's our spiritual practice. Every time we make a choice to do something nice for our spouse, every time, that is us connecting to our core values. Every time. And of course, I'm really hot on play dates. I think people have to date. That's one of the best things that you can do. Get out of the house, get out of the rut, and see yourselves and each other in a different environment. So I'm scared to ask when the last time it was for you having dates, but if it's been more than a month, get out of the house, okay? You gotta get out and have a play date. So let's review, okay? I'm almost done here. Ready? If it's not working, do something different, yes. Change the interaction, never the spouse, okay. Remember that what you resist will persist. Accentuate the positive. And practice appreciation. Remember that relationship work is really inner work. It's not just that person, but it's your own internal work. And pay attention to what we're doing, not what our spouse is doing. What am I doing here? And this is, I didn't talk about this before, but I like this one. I learned this from Taco Hose, actually. She said, it's always better to feel close than to be right. Being right is undervalued, is overvalued. It's not that important in the long run. But feeling close, that's the key. So just remember, okay, look at your relationship a little bit differently if you can. Remember that relationships are like dances, okay? Because if you think about it that way, you can have confidence that if you change the step, any step, you can make a difference in the interaction. And then remember that your marriage, your blessing, is your spiritual path. Good luck on the path. Thank you.